I'm Elisa Puckett, a partner with Quilling, Sealander, Lowndes, Winslet & Mosier, and I'm here with Maury Hinterlong, Corporate Counsel at 𝐏𝐥𝐞 Energy. We are both members of the DBA's We Lead Class of 2022, and we're very excited to be here to interview Beverly Godbey as a living legend of the Dallas Bar. A short introduction about Beverly. She obtained her undergraduate degree from SMU, where she graduated magna cum laude. She has a JD from Tulane Law School. She's currently a principal at Amy Stewart Law, where she advises policyholders on coverage issues and also serves as an expert witness on coverage and bad faith issues. Before joining Amy Stewart Law, Beverly was at Gardner Wynne in Dallas for a little over 20 years, where she was a partner and a co-chair of the litigation section. She's also a past president of the Dallas Bar Association and serves as an ethics instructor for the Texas Center on Legal Ethics. In addition, Beverly is an avid pro bono advocate and has won numerous awards for her dedication and volunteer services, including the Equal Access to Justice Rainmaker Award, the Pro Bono Appreciation Award, the Jurisprudence Award from the Anti-Defamation League, and the Dallas Bar Foundation's Justinian Award. So, just to start us off, what motivated you to go to law school?
Well, my path to law school was a little bit different than the paths of some other lawyers. I was working as a waitress at the S&S tea room one summer after college when my dad approached me because he'd been out on the golf course with one of his lawyer friends who had suggested that I might like to come work as a paralegal in his law firm that summer. And I was very surprised about this. And so I talked to my dad about it. We decided this might be a really fun job to have. So I took it on and I became a paralegal that summer. And I loved it. It was great. I don't come from a family of lawyers. Most of my family is in the education field, professors and educators. So I always thought I was going to be a teacher. And it really had not occurred to me that I might enjoy a career in the law. But I liked the camaraderie, I liked the teamwork, I liked the work itself. It was challenging, interesting work. And so it gave me the idea that maybe I could do that too. And that was such a revelation to me that, you know, I could do something other than what I had planned. And so that's what drove me to law school.
Can you tell us a little about the first case you tried?
I can. I have a good story about that too. One of my mentors told me at the very beginning of being a trial lawyer that you should always go to the place of the action. And it doesn't matter what kind of case it is, whether it's a automobile collision or a products liability case, or, you know, I do coverage work. I even go to the site of whatever calamity took place that people are now looking for insurance coverage. So it was a rear end collision. And I decided I needed to go to the scene just because I'd been told to do that. It was a good idea to do it. And the automobile accident had taken place on a tiny little country road, 2-lane country road with no shoulders, up on the top of a bridge. And you couldn't see coming up or down the bridge. It was a little high up bridge. So I went up there and I looked around and I thought, you know, if the plaintiff had just pulled the car off the road a few feet, there was this grassy area, I mean, a grassy shoulder area. And if he had just pulled the car off the road a few feet forward, he could have avoided the entire collision. And of course, this is back before you have a cell phone and you have a phone everywhere you go. I had taken my investigator out there with me with a camera, and he shot some great pictures of it. And then, of course, you had to go get them developed. You know, you don't have instantaneous photos like you do now. And when he came back with those photos and I looked at them, it looked like the grassy knoll in downtown Dallas through the triple overpass. It looked huge. And I thought, well, you know what? Maybe I'll just argue that, that he should have pulled his car off the road. And I did that, and I won. And I was so surprised to have won a rear-end collision case, which are just usually barking dog cases. But my senior partner was so amazed at the outcome that he framed the jury verdict, and I still have it. So that was fun. But the lesson to be learned there is you for sure ought to go look at whatever it is that you're litigating, because you might find some very interesting facts that will help you with your case.
What do you enjoy most about practicing law now, and has that changed?
Oh, that's a trick question. I think if you had asked me that 20 years ago, I for sure would have said, I love going into the courtroom. I really do. My next case that I try will be my 50th. So I have a good bit of trial experience in all kinds of cases, not just coverage cases. And I love going into the courtroom. I like the challenge of it, and I like interaction with the judges. But I'll tell you what, as I've progressed in my career, I really have come full circle to where now what I really like the best is counseling clients on problem solving. I think that's what really helps clients the most, is they want someone to figure out how to solve the problem that they have. And that's really the reason that I went to law school in the first place too. That goes back to your first question about, being a paralegal and deciding to go to law school. One of the other things I really liked about that was I could tell that it was a way to really impact people and to really help people. And that's a really good reason to go to law school, is so that you can help folks. And I feel like that's what I'm doing today. And I still enjoy going into the courtroom, don't get me wrong, but you don't always need to. A lot of times you can simply find another resolution, and that is really a good way to help a client.
So what is your best advice on how to work with outside counsel?
I like to think that I am the kind of lawyer who is professional and kind and generous, and I grant extensions. So I think it's better to be nice, to be a nice counsel. I tell you what, if there's an opposing counsel who calls me up yelling and screaming on the phone, he has 0% chance of getting me to do whatever it is that he wants. I think it's much better to be nice. And I have a great example of that too. And I'm even going to call out his name because he knows this story, and everybody who knows him would understand this. My great pal, Mark Stanley, who is a very, very well-known plaintiff's lawyer in town and very successful. I had a case with him many years ago where we were on opposing sides, and we settled our differences. We settled the case, and I was trying to get the settlement check from my client. And, I was being reasonably diligent about it, calling. And of course, Mark would call and he said, Beverly, where's the settlement check? Do you have it yet? And I would call the client and try to get it. But it was taking forever. And so I'm sitting in my office on a Thursday afternoon, and suddenly arrives this huge bouquet of flowers. I mean, huge. This thing was large. And I thought, that was so nice of my husband. He knows I've been having kind of a tough week. That's really a pick-me-up, and I really appreciate that. So I go over to the bouquet and I pull out the card, and the card says, Beverly, please get me the check. Mark Stanley. I just wish the ground had opened up and I had stepped into it, because I was so humiliated and so shamed that he had to go to that trouble to make me get the check. But I'll tell you what, it galvanized me into action. I was on the phone that afternoon. I had a courier out there to my client to pick it up. I had it couriered over to his office on Friday morning so his client could have it before the weekend. And I never want to be in that circumstance ever again. So I say kill him with kindness.
So with 2 kids and a bustling career, how do you manage to balance work life?
Ever since we talked about this at the beginning, I have given this question a lot more thought, because I really looked back and reflected. Really, how did I do it? It's hard. I have the greatest admiration for women lawyers, particularly in the pandemic, who have little children running around the house with them while they're trying to work, or single parents who are trying to balance all of this and work. And, I had help. Well, that was the key, I think. I finally decided one of the reasons that I was successful at balancing, and I wasn't always successful, let me just say, but it was because my husband is an equal partner in our child raising and in our careers. And he took the kids up to the court with him as many times as I took them to my office. He ran down to the school if we got a call from the school that somebody was sick, and picked them up as frequently as I ever did that. And, he would watch them on the nights that I had to work late. And And he really was incredibly supportive. And I know not everyone can have a darling of a husband like mine, but that really helped. And even the worst thing I ever did to him was when the kids were little. They were maybe 2 and 4. I mean, really little, not in school. They needed a lot of assistance, you know. And I had a case that got called to trial in Kingsville, Texas, which is down in the valley. It was in front of Judge Manuel Bañales, who is a very excellent judge. And the interesting thing about that case is I tried it with Amy Stewart, my current colleague. I know, back when we were both at Gardere, if you can believe that. So we trundled on down to Kingsville, and we were going to be there for 3 weeks. It was a really big case. And poor David, I left him with, you know, the care and custody of 2 tiny children for the whole time I was gone. And he would call every night when he picked up the kids from daycare. So it'd be like 6:30 in the evening. He called, put them on the phone so they could talk to mom, who's so far away and not coming home anytime soon. And then he'd call me back again at about 10:30, just so he could hear about if my day had been good and to tell me, you know, go out there and give it to him tomorrow, you know, go Bev, go. He's very supportive. And I love that. And the good news was after we were down there for a week, the case settled. And so I was able to come home. But I just felt like that maybe sums up how it was I personally was able to manage this. I don't think I can recommend that every woman go out there and, you know, bring home a David Godbey for yourself. But I would if I could, because he's a treasure. And I do think it helps to have someone who is willing to help you so that you can succeed, because it's very, very difficult. But I also want to say, for all the women lawyers out there, please, 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 it gets better. Keep at it. Please stay in the profession. We need you. I know it's hard sometimes. If it's hard, pick up the phone and call me and we'll talk through it. I mean, I don't want the women to leave the profession. The issue is not how many women are graduating from law school. The issue is how many women are staying in the profession when it gets really hard like that, and it does. But I implore everyone, please, to stay in, because women lawyers are just awesome. And if you've gone through these sorts of things, it makes you even a better lawyer and a better person.
So kind of along similar lines, but not necessarily related to work-life balance per se, what advice would you give your younger self, or do you wish you would have gotten when you were a younger lawyer? I've also given a little bit of thought to this too, and I think maybe my answer is driven in part by when I was trained. This is my 40th year in practice, so I was a young lawyer a really long time ago, and back then there weren't very many women lawyers, particularly in a trial practice. So I didn't have very many lawyers to watch or to emulate. So most of my training came from male partners, and they were excellent. They were awesome mentors and awesome lawyers, but they have a different style. And I mean, they would say what would be useful in the courtroom as they paced around in the courtroom, or, you know, made gestures or emphasized things in a loud voice. And I realized that's just not my personality. I am a quiet person. I tend to be sort of quiet and studious and listen rather than talk. But you know what? Any kind of personality type can be successful. So I think what I've realized, and what I wish someone had told me, is that it's okay to be yourself. It's okay to develop into whatever type of lawyer you want to develop into within your personality type. And if you're more comfortable going into a courtroom, which I surely am, and speaking quietly and being studious and listening and putting on my evidence in a, you know, just a very structured manner, without the histrionics and without the loud voice and without the pacing, then that can be very, very successful. And people have all sorts of personality types. So I say, be free to be yourself, whether you're a corporate lawyer, or you're an in-house lawyer, or you're a trial lawyer, or whatever you are. Find your own style and be comfortable in your own skin. And don't let anybody tell you that you can't be successful unless you do something different than what comes naturally to you. So you've mentioned all your trial experience and that you're coming up on your 50th trial. What advice would you give to younger lawyers? Because it seems like it's getting harder and harder to get into the courtroom, to get into try a case and those sorts of things. So
it is. You're absolutely right, and I'm sad about that. I was lucky because the partners I was working for at the time of some of my earliest trial experience just basically picked me up by the arms and threw me into the courtroom and said, "We'll see you later." So it was kind of, trial by fire, and I really don't suggest that that's the best possible way to do it. However, it does work, but there may be better ways to do it now. I think one of the best ways to get experience if you're a young lawyer is to do pro bono. You can get into the courtroom really fast and really handle lots of different cases if you do pro bono work. The very first pro bono case I ever had was representing a doctor. And you might say, really? I mean, that's not who you normally see at the pro bono clinics. But this poor guy, he was a young guy, and he just had his medical license. He was just out in practice. And he made some judgment errors and sampled some of his own prescription drugs. I know he got into drugs, and some of his patients complained, and they complained to the Texas State Board of Medical Examiners, and they suspended his license. And so he went into inpatient drug treatment, which is very, very expensive. So he was there for 8 weeks, 10 weeks, some long period of time, came out totally clean and sober, but with no money and just almost being kicked out of his house and nowhere to go. So part of the issue here is it can happen to anybody. Anybody can fall on hard times, even, who would otherwise be a successful doctor. So when I took on this case, this was also, again, before we practically even had the internet. I think maybe Lexis was in its infancy. In any event, I had to go into the books and figure out what to do for this poor doctor at the Texas State Board of Medical Examiners to get his license reinstated. And I made so many anonymous calls down there. There was this poor woman on the phone. And I never told her who I was. But I was like, so can we bring witnesses? Can I file affidavits? What do I need to do? Can I bring a court reporter? And I probably talked to her every day for 2 weeks trying to figure out what to do for this poor man. And we finally got it all worked out, and I got a hearing date and took him down there. We took boxes of evidence in the car with us as we went down to Austin. And so here I was, barely out of law school, and I'm appearing in front of the Texas State Board of Medical Examiners. And we put on our evidence, and they left the room for the obligatory 20 minutes. And then while we're just sitting there, sweating. And then they file back in. It's like being in an en banc court, it's very intimidating. And they announced that they were going to let him have a provisional license for some period of time to make sure that he remained clean and sober. But I tell you what, at the end of all of that, I had great experience. I had gotten some experience I would never otherwise have gotten in learning how to solve a really big problem that I didn't know anything about at the time. And I think you can get great experience doing something like that. I'll give you another example really quickly, too. I've done some work for the Human Rights Initiative, which is immigration law. And the work I've done has been for children. And it's been special immigrant, juvenile status, SIJS cases. And one of the cases I took several years ago involved a family of 5 children. And the youngest child, the first time I ever met him, was 3 years old. And recently, in the past several months, we had a victory celebration at HRI, which is what they do. They bring all their clients together with the lawyers who have been representing them pro bono. And we had a green card ceremony. Mm-hmm. And we set them all out, and they were all sitting there, and they didn't know why they were down there. Mm-hmm. And, then the HR people whip the green cards out from behind their back and, give them one by one by one. I mean, they were like bawling. They were so happy. And, that's the reason why you do this, is because it is so meaningful to people who otherwise can't help themselves. And to do an SIJS case, I don't know how much you know about that, but It has two parts to it. The first part is in family court. Now, I have never set foot hardly in family court in my life, and you have to go into family court, put on evidence, have a proceeding in front of the judge. I mean, the whole 9 yards. So you get to appear in family court if you take one of those cases. And then once you have your orders from family court, then you go to immigration court. Never been in immigration court ever in my life. And so you go to immigration court, and we made several appearances in immigration court. So if a young lawyer wants to get experience, pick up an SIJS case, and you'll have an opportunity to file pleadings and argue motions, put on evidence, do all of that in family court, and then do it again in immigration court. So it's a great learning experience. And so I would recommend HRI or DVAP, here at the Dallas Volunteer Attorney Program. It's a great place to pick up experience if you're a young lawyer and want to get into court and do proceedings. I wouldn't have thought I could ever learn to do immigration cases or any of these things, but you can. And so I highly recommend that for young lawyers who want to get more experience.
So as an advocate of pro bono work, how do you advise lawyers who also want to do more pro bono work, balance that with their commitments to their family and their day job?
I know that's hard too, because I would like pile it on here. I would say, not only do you want to have work-life balance and you want to do pro bono, but you also want to do bar work, and you also want to work with the young lawyers. And I mean, that, there are hardly enough hours in a day. I think you just have to pace yourself. I have learned several things. Most firms are thrilled to have you do pro bono work. It's a great thing to do, and it's possible to balance that with regular work. I've also learned that there are many, many judges out there who, if they know and if you announce that you are there to handle a pro bono case, when they're calling the docket, they will put you first. They know you're down there not making any money, and they are willing for you to go ahead of those folks who are in a different circumstance. And so if you say, I'm here in a pro bono case, you go right to the front of the line. I've had that happen several times, and it's delightful that the judges will help in that way. So I know it's hard. I realize that it is, but I hope that everyone can find time to do it, because it is so worthwhile. And I guess that takes us all the way full circle right back to why you go to law school. It's because the look on somebody's face when you've helped that person who otherwise couldn't have ever gotten legal help is really makes it all worthwhile.
Would you say that's what's motivated you to continue doing pro bono work throughout your entire career?
Absolutely. And it's just gotten even more so. I mean, it was good the first time around, but it's exponentially better now, I would say. Pro bono is its own reward. It really is.
So Beverly, I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't know if I have the courage, or maybe that's the right word, to take on a case on something I know absolutely nothing about. I've never done any family law work. I've never done any immigration work, and it just sounds intimidating as a whole. So how do you get the gumption to agree to take a case in an area of law you know nothing about?
Well, I'll tell you, I have an answer for that. There are lots and lots of resources. All of these agencies that do pro bono and help you find pro bono cases, like HRI and DVAP, they all have mentors who you can pick up the phone and call these mentors pretty much any time of the day or night. Whenever you're finding time to work on your pro bono case, you can pick up the phone and call, and they will talk you through everything you need to know. And they have reams and reams of forms. HRI was particularly good about that, because some of the immigration forms are horrifying. They are. You don't know what to put in 27A or B, or pick one of the four choices. They're government forms. It was terrible. But they have them where they're all filled out, and they can tell you, you need to check this box or don't check this box, or fill out this part or don't fill out this part. So you get really, really good training. And the training is short and to the point, because they know that they're dealing with busy professionals who don't have a lot of extra time to do this. And everybody is so thankful to have volunteers. They are very good at the training and at the time that it takes to be trained, and the resources like the forms to help you do all of these things. And then you can send all your completed forms and let somebody who knows what he or she is doing look it all over and make sure everything is okay. And I've even had coaching lawyers come down with me to the courthouse to help me. I mean, let me go up there and do it, but stand in the background in case I mess anything up, or I say the wrong thing,
or you miss something,
or I miss something exactly, or the court does something unusual and I don't know what to do.
Yeah,
that is so good. That really frees me up to be able to have the confidence, like you say, and to have the courage to get up and do some of these cases because I've had the training and they have my back. And if somebody has your back and has given you good training and coaching and the resources that you need and the help that you need, you can learn to do anything. So Sally Crawford, she's one of the past presidents of the Dallas Bar. I don't know if y'all know her. I've never met anyone who has taken as many pro bono cases as Sally Crawford. And she took them in landlord-tenant and in dog law and in, every kind of law you can imagine. And her stories were awesome. And she helped so many people. And she's my go-to person when I just need a refresher in my own mind about, can I really do this kind of a case? I think, Sally can do it. So, and she's a great lawyer too. So I can do it too. We just need to take advantage of what's there for us and help as many people as we can.
Now, you're a past president of the Dallas Bar. What would you recommend that people do to get more involved with the bar?
Well, you have to start somewhere. I say if you're a young lawyer, start with the Dallas Association of Young Lawyers. That's a great organization, and unlike, we call it the big bar, unlike the DBA, I don't mean that in a pejorative sense either, I really don't. They have a lot of, the DBA has a lot of fun too, but the young lawyers do service projects together, and they have a lot of bonding experiences, and they do a lot of mentoring programs. And it's a great way for a young lawyer to jump into bar activities. And if you have a proclivity toward any particular project that they have, you can move up and be a committee chair, and then you can move up more and you can run for a seat on the Dallas Bar Association board. There are lots and lots of opportunities for folks to do little bitty jobs. I mean, there are some jobs that are really small that don't take up a lot of time and don't take up a lot of effort, all the way up to the great big jobs. And so there's a place for everyone in the bar. And I think it's fun just because I enjoy being around bar colleagues and, working together and working on projects together. I tell you what, I learned a lot of things. I mean, one thing that I did the year I was Dallas Bar president, which every president does, is you have all these speaking engagements. I mean, pretty much one every day somewhere. And it's not all big, long speeches, but it'd be introductions or award ceremonies or, all sorts of things. And it really helped with my confidence in just getting up and standing up in front of people and speaking coherently. So I think you can learn a lot of things also from bar work, just improve your skill set in many ways.
I know from personal experience that sometimes after appearing from a hearing in front of the court, you don't always have the insight for why the judge has ruled the way he or she has. And sometimes when you kind of anticipated the ruling would go your way and it doesn't, you're kind of left wondering, right, what happened?
Exactly.
What would you suggest lawyers keep in mind in that type of scenario?
Well, I don't know. I had something like that happen to me one time. This was an incredible case. It was, I was representing, the case was involving Sears Roebuck. I don't know if y'all remember Sears, which was around forever, which used to sell all sorts of things. Well, Sears had sold this plaintiff a food processor. And I wasn't representing Sears, I was representing the manufacturer of the food processor. And her allegation was that she brought it home from Sears that very day. She wanted to make some coleslaw in her new food processor. So she stuffed the thing full of cabbage. She pushed the button and it exploded. And she flew across the kitchen until she was hanging by her earlobes from the refrigerator handles, until her husband was able to come in and free her. So it was kind of a wild case right from the very first allegations. And it got even crazier after that until we finally got down to a 2-week trial that we were going to have in Judge Hartman's court. Merrill Hartman, who is one of my favorite judges ever. Speaking of pro bono, he's like the father of pro bono because he was such an advocate for pro bono. But I had a case in his court, and he was a delightful person and a very good judge. And the very first day that the plaintiffs came into the courtroom, they showed up in their pajamas. And I did not think that was, I thought that was disrespectful, you know? And so I moved the court to, you know, please tell them to go home and change their clothes or put on a robe or, you know, do something respectful. And he's like, no, denied, no. And one day the husband wheeled the wife in a wheelchair. And a judge, you know, we're not aware of any reason why the plaintiff needs a wheelchair. Can we, you know, can she just sit in the seats like a no, she can't, no. Then we heard from some of our witnesses that they were making calls to them at night, trying to tell them what to say the next day in their testimony. I was like, Judge, you need to put a stop to this. They're witness tampering. He's like, no, denied. And it went on like that for 2 weeks. I mean, they were just doing, the more he denied all my motions, the worse their antics became in the courtroom. And I was getting more and more frustrated. I'd go home to my poor husband and say, why is he doing this? This is just wrong. You know, you can't have people doing these types of antics in the courtroom. It's just not right. And he would like, just sit down. It's okay. You know, don't worry about it. Just get ready for tomorrow. And at the end of 2 weeks, I was so astonished that we won the case, which was great. I was really happy about that. And then the plaintiffs didn't appeal, so the case was totally gone. And it was about several months after that, I was at some pro bono reception with Judge Hartman, and he came over to me and he said, Beverly, I know you were really, really frustrated with me in the case. And I just want to tell you that I'm sorry, but I will also tell you that I knew from the get-go, I really believed from the get-go that you were going to win that case, and I didn't want there to be any reversible error in that trial. I was just like flabbergasted, going, well, thank you so much, Judge. I really appreciate that. You know? I wouldn't recommend that always, but you know, it gave me some good insight, truly good insight into the judicial process and into the jury system process. And I just have to put in a plug for our system of, you know, our third branch of government, because it really does work, and you just have to be patient with it. We do have truly the best system anywhere in the world with, you know, our judges and our juries and our jury trials and our ability to represent litigants the way that we do. And, you know, all through that trial, I may have thought that there was going to be huge miscarriage of justice there, but there wasn't. The judges are there to watch over the process, and the jury is there to listen and maybe not pay attention to the crazy antics of the plaintiffs. You know, maybe that all comes full circle, but I'm a true believer in the beauty of the jury trial and how it works and how we need to continue to support it.
Elisa spoke about your involvement in ethics and teaching lawyers ethics.
Yes.
And why do you think ensuring lawyers understand their ethical obligations is important to the practice of law?
Well, I have to go back to the immortal words of the Honorable Doug Lang. I don't know if y'all know him, but he was one of my partners for many, many years at Gardier, and then was on the Fifth Court of Appeals. And he's a very bright and erudite person. And he wrote this book called Deeds, Not Words. And it has everything to do with exactly your question. Why is it important for lawyers to be ethical, and why do we need to promote that? And he says it's because the greatest thing you bring to the practice of law is your integrity. And you can't let that go. And if you let that go, you've let it all go. So you need to practice law as ethically as you can and engage in professionalism. And that goes back to your question about how do you deal with, you know, opposing counsel. You deal with opposing counsel with professionalism and grace and kindness, and not with harsh words or unethical conduct or anything like that. And so I think it all comes back to integrity, just like Justice Lang always said is, and also from the Texas Center for Legal Ethics, Jonathan Smavey, the executive director there always says, you know, your word is your bond, and it just needs to always be like that. People need to be able to trust you in the practice of law. And don't you find that to be true? I mean, I think it's so much easier and better to practice with counsel who are being nice to each other and are following Dondi and are practicing with professionalism, and that I can trust. And that if they tell me they'll do something by a particular date, they will. And if I tell them I'll do something, they'll do that as well. So I would like to think that if we all practice professionalism and really kept ethics in the forefront of our minds, we would all be in a much better place.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit more about your presentation called Your Brain on Ethics, how that thing between your ears can lead you astray?
Yes. I also have to credit Jonathan Smavey for that title. That was a brainchild, haha. Anyway, he got together with Professor Robert Prentice from the University of Texas. He teaches in the business school there. And he's a lawyer, but he's a behavioral ethicist, and he looks at all sorts of behaviors, psychological behaviors, and how that impacts the ethics of lawyers. And it's a fascinating study. Professor Prentice has written many, many books on this subject, and it's all about how you want to be a good ethical practicing lawyer, but there are lots of biases and heuristics and justifications for why you're not sometimes. So it's the science of good people doing not very good things. And his main premise is most people want to do good things, but they'll cheat just as much as they can and still feel okay about it. Like driving a few miles over the speed limit if you don't think anybody's looking. And so, an example he gives is a lawyer who maybe needs to pad his hours a little bit. He's thinking about padding his hours. Now, we all know you can't do that. That's totally unethical to charge a client for work that you didn't do. We all know better than that. But, he's thinking to himself, well, everybody does that. Or he's thinking to himself, well, there's so many worse things I could do. I mean, and the professor's example is just look at all the banks I didn't rob, or you can or he'll say, it's not really hurting anybody. This client has got gazillions of dollars, and if this helps me a little bit with my compensation, that's okay, because my family needs the money more than his does. I mean, it's rationalizations like that. Mm-hmm. And he has all these examples of lawyers who are tempted to do things like that, little ethical breaches, and what the little devil inside your head is telling you about whether you should do that versus the little angel on the other side saying, do not do that, you know better than that. And his main point with all these just crazy examples is just to bring it to your attention. Mm-hmm. Just make sure that if you're faced with something that potentially might be an ethical problem, that you're thinking about it, and top of mind is that you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be listening to the rationalizations and the excuses and the biases and all the reasons why it might be okay for you to do this. And so we took this on the road, and we traveled all over the state doing this presentation. And it was fascinating, the questions that people would ask, and they'd say, well, what would you do in this circumstance? And I tell you what, it was a lot of fun, and it was great to educate so many young lawyers. And they finally taped it. And I went on to the Texas Center for Legal Ethics website to see if I could find it, because I know it's on there somewhere. And they have a section on taped presentations. And so I think you can find it if you go on there. But it's a great presentation. And as I say, it's fascinating to listen to the professor talk about all these psychological issues and how they intersect with legal issues, and what we can do to be better ethical lawyers while we practice.
What's the most outrageous case you've ever tried?
That's hard, because I've tried several outrageous cases, but I have to say probably one that I tried several years ago where we were representing the manufacturer of the Winchester 2020 rifle. And those are those rifles like you see on the Rifleman, you go click, 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 click like this. So the plaintiff had alleged that the rifle malfunctioned, and that's the reason he shot his wife dead. And so I tried it with one of my senior partners, and we talked about how is the best way to handle this, and we decided to try it like a murder case. Well, I am no way a criminal lawyer ever, or have had any criminal trials or pro bono criminal trials or any of that. And so, how do you go about trying a murder case? Well, you look at the guy's finances to see whether or not there might be some reason why it would be helpful for him to have the life insurance on his wife, which in fact he had. And you look and you see, was there a mistress out there somewhere? Is there some other reason why it might be useful and convenient for his wife not to be around any longer? So we looked into all this smarmy stuff, It's just about his finances and about his marital situation and, what he did outside of his job and all of that sort of stuff. And you would be amazed what all you could find. And again, this was really back before the internet where you could just do internet searches on folks. I mean, we hired investigators and went and looked under rocks and, all through the property records and through, that's when people didn't have cell phones too. So you couldn't just get his cell phone and look and see who he'd been texting with. So we came up with all of this stuff on this poor guy. There was nothing the matter with that gun, nothing at all. It was fine. It was working just fine. We think he had just figured out that his life was going to be better. I hate to say this, it just sounds callous, but he was going to blame this on a product that was a perfectly fine product where we had to try the case a little bit differently. And that was an eye-opening experience to me to really look at a case differently than just documents and timelines and that sort of thing, to really have to go behind the scenes and look at personalities and motivations and things that I don't normally look at in civil trials. You just don't have any opportunity for that. And so that's the way we tried the case. And amazingly enough, the jury believed us and decided that there was nothing the matter with the gun. Now, of course, this is not a conviction. Nothing bad happens to the plaintiff as a result of this. But as I say, I thought that was just sort of an outrageous fact situation. And it was a learning experience for me to really broaden my horizons on different ways that you might be able to look at a case and look at a fact situation and assist your client in ways that maybe you haven't had the opportunity to do in the past.
It's very creative.
It was, but it was I have to say, it was my senior partner who came up with this. I don't think I would have ever come up with that, but he was a very smart man. And so yeah, you can be that's another thing you should learn. You should be creative and clever. I really value the colleagues that I practice with who think outside of the box and come up with creative solutions to problem solving. And I think this is just one of those examples.
And what do you think is the best way to create that environment that allows people to be creative and feel like they can speak up?
I think you have to not be so heavy-handed. For example, in my dealings with my colleagues, I usually don't tell them the result that I want them to find. I say, here's the problem, help me figure out what options we have for solving this problem, without saying, I seem to remember a case, called this that held this. Although I do think that's a remarkable thing for the lawyers who can do that. But I think it's better to let folks have some license with how they go about problem solving, because you tend to get much more creative solutions if you give folks some leeway. And I like it better that way. And if they come back and they can't find anything, or we can't think of a creative solution, you can fall back on the cases that you know. And I think that's perfectly good as a plan B. But I like folks to have the opportunity to think up something new and different.
I think that one of the reasons you're considered a living legend is because of your speaking ability, your involvement in the bar, and your litigation experience, and how well you've done throughout your career and the way you're able to collaborate with people. But can you give us an example of one of the more challenging cases that you've tried?
Wow, let me think. There are a lot of them have been challenging for sure. I think I would probably say I had a case many years ago with a blind judge, and he was a remarkable man, Judge Mixon. And Judge Mixon had been on the bench for many, many years. He was a very experienced judge, and of course he could read everything in Braille. And behind the bench, you couldn't see what his hands were doing. So it was amazing to me that as we were going through the trial, anybody who was speaking, he would look over at that person. So his only requirement that his secretary had called to tell us ahead of time was always, when you first come into the courtroom, say your name and then don't move around. Say your name and stay in the place where you've identified yourself. And so it was amazing to me that I would say, Judge, this is Beverly Godbey, and I'd stay where I was. And every time I spoke, he'd say, and so thank you, Ms. Godbey, for that, for that. And then he'd say, Mr. Whoever else, what would you like to say to that? And he would look at us as we were speaking, and he knew where everybody was. And then he would, if he needed to make a statement, he would simply be reading it in Braille. And the other thing that he required us to do through his assistant was when you submitted the jury charge, you had to submit it like a week in advance. And that's not the case. Normally, at least back in the old days, you didn't even, these days you have to submit your jury charge much sooner. Back when I was first practicing, you could send it up to the court the day before, whatever. But he needed a week. And so his secretary could type it into Braille. And so when he was taking care of the jury charge, I swear the jury would never know he was blind. The way he was able to conduct himself in the courtroom, the jury never would guess. They would never know, because he had this set up where he looked at whoever was talking, and he could do it just seamlessly in Braille and talk. And I have to say, it was hard because those were difficult circumstances in which to try a case, but it was so meaningful to me to see that he had overcome such an amazing hardship to be able to carry on in a way that really reflected beautifully on the legal profession and the judicial branch, in doing his job and doing it so well and doing it with such aplomb, and he was so respectful and awesome to everybody who was in his courtroom, and treated everybody else with dignity and respect despite his challenges. And I greatly admired that. And I thought that he's a perfect example of someone that we should all emulate. We should all be respectful to everyone and courteous and treat everybody, all of our colleagues, even if they've got challenges, you want to treat everyone well. And I love that about that case. And it has stayed with me all these many, many years, to remember how it's so important for particularly people to have, special issues, is just to treat everybody the same, equally, and with respect and dignity.
So Beverly, what's your hidden asset as a woman lawyer?
Wow, that's a tough question. I would say what people say about me, I don't know that I say it about myself, but what people say about me is that I'm very calm and I really don't get ruffled. And young lawyers run around with their hair on fire sometimes, and I understand that. But I've always thought that it's never a crisis. You can always manage it. You just need to bring the heat level down just a little bit in order to manage it. So I would say it maybe is just this inner calm, that you can pretty much solve any problem if you don't get, riled up about it. If you think through it clearly and know that there's not a crisis that you can't manage, we hope. So I would say maybe that's it. Just practicing law with a little bit of an inner calm rather than with an outward crisis.
So, Beverly, thank you so much for being here. with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm truly humbled to be here because, as I say, I don't really consider myself in the same category as some of the other interviewees that you have had. But it's really been delightful to get to know both of you, and I've really enjoyed this so much. And I appreciate that y'all are doing this and that you really are getting in touch with some of the living legends that are out there. So thank y'all very much for what you're doing for the Dallas Bar.